over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. All the stuff we're going to talk about on the show, you can find information about those things over at the website. I wrote up NFL playoff previews early on in the week. We have our bowl game previews that are still posted over there. But we also have daily NHL, college basketball, NBA, a golf preview for the Tournament of Champions from James Mazzola. I'm going to start working on my Major League Baseball stuff here in January because that season will be here before we know it. So always busy, always a lot of stuff going on over at BangTheBook.com. Make sure you head on over there and check it all out. Finally, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB and the number 200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. One guest on the program here today joins me for the full show. That is professional handicapper Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. Brad, how's it going today, man?
Man, it's going all right. How you doing on this fine Thursday?
Very well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me. And before we get into the upcoming bowl games, and we do have to talk the two on Thursday because we haven't talked anything about those on the show here so far, missing 3 shows with the holidays and all that. Bowl season got off to a little bit of a rocky start, but I think things have been going better for us here as we've gotten to the games where you just have a better idea of what's going to happen with some lower variance types of games, I think.
Yeah, really. I mean, it's been an okay bowl season for me. I mean, obviously a couple misses. I mean, probably the biggest would be SMU would be one. Auburn yesterday for me. I was a little stunned at that result for the Tigers. But overall, the more winners than losers, and I guess that's all you can ask for this time of year. But it's still a few head scratchers out there, and obviously hindsight's always being 20/20. It would have been nice to probably fade the Big 12 more often than not. It's been a very disappointing conference so far in bowl season.
Yeah, it definitely has. The Big 12 playing the role of the Pac-12 here, I guess, this bowl season.
Pretty much.
And, I mean, yesterday, like you said, I mean, we kind of looked at this. We sort of talked about January 1st and said, you know what? These games don't really excite us as much as New Year's Day bowl games generally do. Alabama gets over the team total, something you and I talked about on the show last week, with that late touchdown very, very late in the fourth quarter. They got off to a slow start, but then their talent eventually won out. They win the second half 21-0, wind up covering the number. Auburn just not prepared, not motivated, whatever the case is. Wisconsin and Oregon back and forth, very ugly type of game. Georgia, their athletes kind of took over in that game against Baylor too. But that's the thing here. I think with bowl season, we may focus in a little bit too much on, this expectation of motivation or, one team being better than the other on paper, then it doesn't play out that way. The bowls are very complex. I think maybe we undersold it here a little bit this year, something that I resolved to do better with next year. I think maybe we undersold some of these bowl games and just kind of drove home one point and didn't look at the whole picture.
That's a good point. I mean, I'll go to the Alabama-Michigan. It just seemed so obvious to me that Alabama, -7, that's what it was throughout the most of it. I know it went 7.5 yesterday. It just seems so obvious. I mean, clearly Alabama has got the far superior talent to Michigan, but I think the reason why that line was 7.5 is the possibility of questionable motivation for the Crimson Tide, and you might have saw it early, certainly with them down, Alabama down at halftime, but I mean, sooner or later the talent won out, and obviously I think a lot of people in the market probably overreacted to Georgia's players being out. I mean, the reality is even without, and I still lean Georgia's way because that's what my final thought process was. I mean, even without those 10, 12, 13 players, I mean, Georgia's talent still is superior to Baylor. So I thought the market maybe a little bit overreacted there. I mean, it's just like anything. I mean, if you continue to overanalysis stuff, I mean, you can cause paralysis. But I just missed. I'm always a guy that's looking at missed opportunities. I try to be a perfectionist, and I guess if that's the case, I'm in the wrong industry.
Well, I mean, you look at the Alamo Bowl, for example. I thought Utah, I know it was disappointing for them in the Pac-12 championship game. I know it was disappointing that they lost that college football playoff shot. But I figured, okay, they can wipe the slate clean to a degree, get a win over a Texas program that isn't great by any means, but is still a big name. Figure Kyle Whittingham's a great head coach. and they got trucked. I mean, they got completely blown out in that game. And again, you kind of have this thought in your mind, these sort of emotional appeals, and really ultimately it comes down to what happens on the field. And maybe that was one where I made a major misstep. So again, you want to try and learn something from every bet that you make, whether you win or lose. And I will say, maybe this bowl season in particular, I'm really learning a lot more than I feel like I've learned in previous ones.
Yeah, and I think that it's always changing. So I mean, stuff that how you handicap bowl games 10 years ago, I'm not sure it necessarily comes into play. There's just a lot more moving variables. I mean, yeah, players are sitting out, but keep in mind, because of the freshman rule, you can play freshmen now if they hadn't played throughout the course of the season, and there's no, there's no downside to it because it's not going to count against you to say the freshmen have only played 2-3 games so far in the season. So that can kind of compensate a little bit for the players that are sitting out. My overall takeaway is bowl handicapping used to be a little more simpler, but I guess you could say that with handicapping in general, just a little bit more complicated than what it used to be.
All right, so we run through the remaining bowl games here. We haven't really talked about any of these on the show, so going to be a lot of new information for you. Then we'll take an initial look at Clemson and LSU. We'll talk about it a lot more on next week's segment because the national championship game has become college football Super Bowl from a betting standpoint, in the sense that you've got a massive catalog of player, game, and team props to try and figure out. So we'll talk a lot about those on next Thursday's show and throughout next week as well. But for now, we got some bowl games prior to the national championship game. Couple of them here today, Brad. Boston College and Cincinnati in the Birmingham Bowl. Cincinnati, 7.5-point favorite, pretty much market wide. Total on this game in the 53.5 range. The AAC really hasn't looked particularly good in bowls, but with A.J. Dillon sitting out for Boston College and an interim head coach, this one went up from 6.5 to 7.5.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And not only A.J. Dillon sitting out for Boston College, but you mentioned the interim coach there for BC. So two major negatives there for them. You wonder how locked in they are so far the bowl season. I mean, the Cincinnati deserves to be favored. I mean, statistically speaking, there's a superior team if you're looking at yards per play. Although Cincinnati, when it came to yards per game margin, left a lot to be desired. But I trust the stability more of Cincinnati. I took a position with Cincinnati, although 7 was the position I took. 7.5, I'm not as wild about it. If that's the case, looks like weather, rain particularly, going to be a factor. A little bit of wind today. So the total has come down, about 1.5, 2 points since yesterday. I think at the current line, I'd prefer more under than Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think this one's really tricky because also, too, I mean, we kind of saw it in the bowl games yesterday. Very sloppy, lots of turnovers, some slow starts for some of these teams. You're a long way away from having played your most recent game. So there's also that to it. And then you factor in wind and rain and so forth here today. Maybe the first half under, kind of the way to look at this one. But for Cincinnati, very hard to trust them because I mentioned this several times over when I lost on Memphis, both in the AAC championship game and that game in week 14, whatever the hell it was. Cincinnati had gone on a run where they'd been outgained in like 6 of 7 games and had won all of them. So this is a team that just found ways to win. You give them credit for that. You wonder if they find a way to win by margin here in this game. I don't know, but like you said, it's 7.5. It's a much different handicap than it was at 6.5 or 7.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Another, key factor, the OC for BC, he left for Northwestern. So not only down your head coach, you're down an OC, you got a, first-time play caller. So, I mean, it could be, obviously I think it's overall net a negative. But, I mean, sometimes, those first-time guys get a real aggressive. So that would, hurt the over a little bit there. But I think the major point you hit on, the farther away you get from the regular season, I mean, I think offensively there's some struggles and there's a little bit more sloppiness. And where do you see it? Because, I mean, how much are you practicing live special teams in bowl practices? I'm not sure that much. And obviously special teams played a major role in the Rose Bowl yesterday.
All right, so the other game here, game 293, 294 tonight, 7 o'clock Eastern kickoff, Tennessee and Indiana in the Gator Bowl down in Jacksonville. Interesting line movement here, both on side and total. Tennessee up from 1.5 to 3, total up from 48.5 to as high as 55. You talk about offensive coordinators, Kalen DeBoer, who did take the head coaching job at Fresno State, still going to call plays for Indiana here in this one, which kind of explains part of the total move in this one. What do you make of the side move with Tennessee going up from 1.5 to 3?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, very early money. I thought Indiana, even very early in the market, like first day or two of bull betting, was favored at least in a couple spots. I mean, I'm not surprised that Tennessee flipped favor, but I am a little surprised it went to 3. I mean, that goes against my power ratings. I got close to pick 'em here. In fact, I got Indiana by about a half point. So, power ratings would say that clearly a play here, but besides the Auburn, Minnesota, which was a debacle for me, I mean, Big Ten does struggle against the SEC coming into this season. I mean, the Big Ten was 2-10 against the spread against SEC teams in bowl games. It should be a good crowd. It looks like I was, looking at some of the pep rallies for both teams. It looks like both teams are going to travel extremely well here. Should be a little bit high intensity. Surprised, the overs getting a ton of play there. Man, at 3, I don't want anything to do with it. If you told me, Tennessee -2 seems, just a lean for me, and nothing strong. Pizza money at this point on this one. I mean, if it climbs to 3.5, I'd take a position on Indiana.
I think this is such a tough one because, Tennessee, I mean, what do you think about Tennessee? How do you evaluate this Tennessee team that really, really struggled early on in the year? The loss to Georgia State, they had all kinds of problems with BYU, but as the season went along, they got better. Now, of course, you've got some questions here about their offense with Juwan Jennings and all that type of thing. So I don't know. I think this is a really tough handicap because you've got an Indiana team that maybe people kind of disrespected over the course of the season, a Tennessee team that maybe people don't realize how good they were at the end of the year. I'm not going to play this one either. My pure power ratings, Indiana -1, but I'm not going to get involved in this one, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the truth of Tennessee is more what you saw lately. I mean, when you got a second-year coach, I mean, you're looking for trend lines, and it makes sense that they got better at the end. I mean, the market threw them in the trash after the first 2 games. I mean, I think the more truth of them is what they were the last 10 games of the season, and they even covered 6 of their last 7, so clearly exceeding market expectation. But I think the word's out at this point. I mean, even going back to their regular season finale against Vanderbilt, I thought that line was a little pricey, and that was the only game Tennessee didn't cover in their last 7 games. 3 is just not worth it for me to make a position. You're right, Indiana flew a little bit under the radar. I mean, when you're in the same division as, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and whatnot, I mean, it's tough to get a lot of national publicity. But, I mean, this is an Indiana team that is trying to win 9 games for the first time in 52 years, and they seem relatively excited. I mean, the reason the offensive coordinator is staying, this game feels very important to them and even their fan base. So, yeah, just a popcorn game for me. I think it'll be a good bowl atmosphere. I know people say there's too many bowl games, but I think you flick on the TV tonight, you're going to see a pretty good crowd and a pretty good atmosphere there.
I'm just kind of curious because this is the only game that I feel like of these 5 bowl games this really applies to. Kind of keeping an eye towards next season. And obviously there's the bowl bounce and all that we'll talk about from a season win total market standpoint, from an early games of the year line standpoint. But are either one of these 2 teams that you think you may kind of want to back going into next season?
More Tennessee for me. Indiana seems more like an outlier, and I'll just have to see, personnel-wise what they got back. I know Tennessee's done a decent job recruiting under Jeremy Pruitt. Probably them just because of more of the trend line, but probably a little too early for me in the process. Other than, probably 4 or 5 teams where I know I'm going to have a position on, I haven't gone through the teams at this point to really, to figure whether or not I'm going to take positions. Tennessee right now would seem like the obvious team that I'd be more positive on.
Fair enough. We'll definitely revisit that once we get into the spring and summer months here. And let's move on to the Potato Bowl up on the Smurf Turf at Albertson Stadium in Boise, Ohio, taking on Nevada. Ohio, 8.5 point favorite in this one, up from 6.5. This one moved up very early in the process, has kind of sat around 8 now for the most part. There was a little bit of Nevada buyback in there. Total also going up 57.5 to as high as 59.5 in the market. What do you think about this one here on Friday afternoon? Early kickoff out in Idaho, about 1:30 local time.
Yeah, I mean, tough one. I mean, pure power rating for me, factoring in the Nevada suspensions. I mean, 3 of their defensive starters out, and they're missing a 4th guy for at least the first half. I mean, it seems fair, although, I mean, call me square, but, historically speaking, I just don't want to lay more than a touchdown with a MAC team in a bowl game, especially a MAC team playing in unfamiliar territory out there in Boise. Not going to take a position, though, on Nevada because, I mean, you look at these two teams statistically speaking. I mean, Ohio in yards per play margin was top 35 in the country. Nevada in yards per play margin, bottom 15 in the country. So, I mean, that's a reason if you're, looking at the rotation and seeing a MAC team favored by 8. I mean, that's why, statistically speaking, plus the Nevada suspensions on defense. Lean for me is on the over. I mean, if you want to get at the side, probably Ohio first half makes some sense to me. Over for me. Weather doesn't look like it's going to be a factor. I checked it yesterday. High 40s, low wind. I mean, that's about as good as it gets in Boise in early January. So over for me.
I think this one's tough because I understand the line move, and I think that we did talk about this a little bit early on in the process. I mean, Nevada just decimated in point differential because they got really, really blown out in all 5 of their losses. And their 7 wins, most of them relatively close. They did beat UTEP by 16, but beat Purdue by 3 in a game where they were down bad going into halftime. Beat Weber State by 6, San Jose State by 3, San Diego State by 4, Fresno by 7. Then, of course, they lose the rivalry game against UNLV to finish out the regular season. Statistically, they don't look very good. But at the same time, I mean, Ohio plays in the MAC East, and the MAC East is atrocious, as we all know. So what do we get from Ohio here in this game? Nathan Rourke, arguably one of the most important players to his respective team in the country, probably 8, 9, maybe even 10-point adjustment if he was ever to be out for a game. That's how much he means to that team. So what does Ohio do? A long way from home, playing against a team that's, probably better than most of what they played in conference play. It's a hard handicap, I think.
You're telling me, man. Again, when I said over, more pizza money. Ohio, they're like a box of chocolates. I mean, and this goes back not only this year, but even last year. I mean, their highest of highs is really good. I mean, I think statistically speaking, last couple of years, I mean, they could be as good as any team in the MAC. And then, I mean, they'll have 2-3 games in a season where, I mean, you're certainly scratching your head. I mean, what was that? So, I mean, I wouldn't be. But this is a very high variance game. I think if you're looking to back Nevada, don't be afraid to sprinkle on the money line. And but I certainly could see Ohio winning by. I mean, just judging like you mentioned, Nevada's poor results in games that they lost. I wouldn't be a bit surprised. Ohio could easily win the game by 3 touchdowns. So maybe if you want to have some fun this time of year, I don't know because it's an isolated game. It's the only Friday bowl game. Maybe a certain book or two will have some pleaser lines and stuff. And this might be the game to do it. I think it's certainly a high variance game.
Ohio plus 1.25 yards per play in conference action, and they only went 5-3 against the MAC. So that kind of worries me a little bit. But again, I mean, it's very, very tough to really have a strong pulse on this game. I think could be kind of an interesting one. I also think both teams are very well coached too. So I think both teams should be ready for this bowl game. But obviously that kind of remains to be seen. We go to Saturday here, 277, 278. The Armed Forces Bowl down in Fort Worth, Texas, Tulane and Southern Miss. And my God, this is an early kickoff, 10:30 local time kickoff in the morning. Tulane's 7-point favorite in this one, total of 56.5. But man, these poor kids playing at 10:30 in the morning.
Yeah, I mean, that got me off of the over. That's it's sleepy time for college kids, 10:30 in the morning to be ready and get going for a game. I wonder what wake-up call is for this one for the kids. I mean, that doesn't sound like a big-time reward to me, but I guess TV money, you got to get the game over with before the NFL playoffs start. To me, slight value Tulane. I mean, they limp in here with 5 losses in their last 6 games, but a couple of, several of those close. I think that might give us some value here. Tulane, when you're looking at 2 group of 5 schools, I mean, it's a little surprising that Tulane, when you look at strength of schedule, about 40 spots higher than Southern Miss. So there's a little bit of advantage there. And even the Greenway, where even though they played a much tougher schedule, statistically speaking, a much better team. So again, these are very tough bowl games. I really didn't have a strong position on any of the last 5 games, but for me, just a pizza money type of bet on Tulane -7.
I will say this. I mean, obviously Tulane losing 5 of their last 6, but I mean, there's no shame in losing at Memphis, at Navy, losing to Central Florida, at SMU. The loss at Temple by 8 wasn't necessarily a great look for them, but I mean,
I played Temple in that game. I played Temple, so I didn't understand that line move. It was all the money was on Tulane, so I understood that one even.
Well, and that's something that's interesting too, is we saw Tulane money week after week after week during the regular season, and this line hasn't moved at all. So
good point.
Maybe that's kind of a little bit of a sign here. But one thing I will say that's really interesting, if you would have asked me, a prop bet, is Willie Fritz the head coach at Tulane for this bowl game, yes or no, I would have probably juiced the no. I'm kind of surprised he's still here. I really am.
No, I mean, just didn't have he hasn't had like that wow season, like that 8, 9, 10 wins, and he's starting to get up there in age. So, I mean, I don't want to go down the age discrimination type of road here, but I think a lot of it is, I think if you really, dive deep into college football, I mean, I think that Willie Fritz is a really good coach, but I mean, keep in mind, these are athletic directors and board of trustees and school presidents that are making the hire. And I question a lot of their decision making in some of these. I mean, he's going to turn, 60 here. So I just did this year. So I think the fact that he hasn't broken through and had like a 9-10 win season at Tulane's probably affected him. And I think that the age is probably playing a negative part against him as well.
Yeah, no, that's fair. He's just one of those guys whose name comes up all the damn time. And then he winds up not getting a job anywhere else. I mean, of course, he got, upgraded to the Tulane job, which was, a nice upgrade for him. But it's a tough bowl game here, too. I agree with you. I think that, Tulane probably is the side. But again, like I said, week after week after week, Tulane money came in, wasn't necessarily rewarded, and now it's not coming in for the bowl game. So maybe that's kind of the sign, sort of reading the tea leaves here. For this one. One more bowl game to talk about, the Lendingtree Bowl down in Mobile, Miami of Ohio, and Louisiana, 279-280 on this one. Louisiana, a 14-point favorite in this game, total in the mid-50s, which is pretty damn high for a Miami Redhawks game. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, but it's kind of low for a Louisiana-Lafayette game. I mean, the only 2 teams to hold the Lafayette under 31 were Mississippi State and App State. So I can't lay 2 touchdowns, even though, I mean, I think it's deserved. I think my power ratings is like in between 13.5, 14, like 13.7 to be perfectly exact. I mean, I think it's deserved that Lafayette's laying the big number here when you look at them statistically. I mean, ULL's top 15 in the country in yards per play margin. I mean, Miami is negative in yards per play. Miami actually was outscored on the season, despite the fact they won 8 games, minus 75 yards per game. I mean, ULL is very dominant, outscoring opponents by nearly 20 points per game. Yards per game, well over 100 yards per game. They're outgaining their opponents on average. Miami's 5 losses this year, all of them by 14 points or less. I mean, all that to me would say take ULL. I just can't lay 14 when you've had this much time in between games. I mean, these 2 teams haven't played in a month, or a little over a month, and they both played in their conference championship games. I actually leaned over, but I could see sloppiness, and I could see a little bit slow. I mean, if you're going to play the under, I think first half makes some sense maybe there.
Well, as you said, the 5 losses for Miami, 14 points or more. They lost by 14 at Ball State, 22 to Western Michigan, destroyed by Ohio State, Cincinnati and Iowa, their losses. And that's a tough thing here, too. And I mean, this isn't Miami's fault. I mean, there's really nothing you can do about it. None of their wins are overly impressive to me. You got a close win over NIU. I guess the Buffalo win by 14 wasn't bad, but Buffalo's a team that had a lot of quarterback issues early on in the year. Matt Myers in that game was 4 of 16 for 59 yards for Buffalo. Buffalo still ran the football well in that game. It's one of those things too where, I think that Louisiana is really recruiting at a pretty quality level right now for a Sun Belt program. And the guys that are in place for them are very, very talented. They've got a speed edge. They have an athleticism edge. But Miami generally faces that disadvantage in almost every game that they play. But they're just so sound schematically that they wound up being able to compete. So maybe they compete here. Obviously, a long trip for Miami down to Mobile for this one. Again, it's one of those where has it always been like this, where these January bowl games just are really hard handicaps? I can't recall.
No, the schedule's a little different this year. I mean, this is the first time Potato Bowl, Armed Forces Bowl, this bowl here are played this late in the season. So, I mean, it's a unique bowl schedule this year. Birmingham Bowl never been played this late before. I mean, on January the 2nd. I mean, usually at this point, it's Katie bar the door. It's all she wrote. We're just waiting on the national championship game at this point, but yet we're sitting here handicapping an additional 5 bowl games. Well, it wasn't like this routinely in past bowl years.
All right, so what we're going to do here to finish up the college football side of things, we're going to scratch the surface on Clemson and LSU. We'll obviously have more time to go in very deep detail about this game next Thursday. And again, as I mentioned, we'll talk some player props, game flow types of things, stuff like that. But Clemson and LSU, I mean, complete domination against Oklahoma. Clemson, they were not the better team against Ohio State. They made great halftime adjustments. Ohio State could have not put the game away in the first half, but obviously could have made it much more difficult on Clemson to come back and win. So Clemson, in the minds of a lot of people, got exposed. Now this line, LSU minus 5.5. I mean, look, man, if we talk about this going into conference championship week, what is this line? Pick 'em, Clemson -1, something like that?
Oh, yeah, easily. Even after conference championship. I mean, there was look-ahead lines before this matchup at a couple different books. One book had LSU -1. The other book had, Clemson -1. So pick 'em prior to the semifinals. I'm going to put myself out on the limb. I mean, I took positions on Clemson. When this line came out 3.5, 4, I bet Clemson. I did not expect the line to climb this high. To me, it looks like a classic overreaction to what they just saw last. And I'll just speak from my own personal power ratings. I mean, I can only get LSU to 3.5 here. And here's what I've done with LSU since the semifinals. I upgraded them 2 points after that one. That's about as much as I can go. I'm giving LSU 2 points of home field advantage with the game being in the Sugar Bowl. I gave him an extra point held for Michael Divinity, one of their best defensive players coming back. So 5 extra points for LSU since the semifinal. That's what I'm giving them. And even though Clemson won the game over Ohio State, even though Clemson covered the game over Ohio State, I downgraded Clemson a full point after that performance last week. So even with those types of adjustments, a 6-point adjustment for me, +5 for LSU counting the home field and -1 for Clemson, I still only have LSU by 3 or so. And I know some people ask, well, maybe you were, too high on Clemson. Maybe you're too low on LSU. Let's go back to the semifinals. That line for LSU against Oklahoma closed 12. My pure power rating had LSU 13.5. So I was higher on the market on LSU in that game. And then as far as the semifinal goes with Clemson, Ohio State, line was 2.5. My power ratings line was Clemson -1. So my power rating said fade Clemson. So to me, this just adds up to a bigger overlay. I'll have, pretty sizable bets on Clemson. We'll see. It may work out, it may not, but from pure power ratings, this just looks like a classic overreaction.
It really does, and you sort of wonder. I mean, Clemson's money is going to come back in here. Obviously there was no reason for a lot of Clemson investment early on in the process because, again, LSU coming off of those 2 very, very impressive performances against Georgia and Oklahoma, and like I said, the narrative now, well, Clemson finally played somebody, and look at what happened. But also, look at what happened in the second half. Ohio State, yeah, J.K. Dobbins was hurt. Yeah, Justin Fields was limited a little bit from a mobility standpoint. But Clemson only gave up 5.3 yards per play in that second half. So they really made great adjustments to what had happened in the first half. And, yeah, they spent a lot of energy in that game. But there was, 16, 17 days between the semifinals and the national championship? They'll be fine. They're going to be able to get everybody healthy, everybody back in the fold. I mean, LSU, look, the time in between games for them is tough too, because you're coming off of such a great performance. You kind of want to keep playing. And obviously the Carly McCord thing is difficult because at least you get some time to process that loss for the program and that loss for the Ensminger family. But, it's not going to be all about football for you here in the prep period either. And you can certainly understand why. And in fact, I've got some close friends that were very, very close to Carly. So, obviously condolences to the family for that. That's the thing, though. You have an LSU team here that they're going through some of the things of their own here in the lead up to this game. So I don't really think that the fact that LSU had a cakewalk in the semifinal matters at all whatsoever to the handicap of this game.
Yeah, I mean, if two teams had to line them up and play a week after, I was in major advantage LSU, like a couple points. I mean, if they had to play a week after, maybe I can understand the line move. Because, I mean, the Clemson-Ohio State game was a war. I mean, you saw players going out of the game left and right, just getting dinged up. But they're not playing. I mean, this is the biggest, rest period in between the semifinals and the championship game we've seen in the 6-year history of the playoffs. So, and to me, I think that's advantage at Clemson. I mean, where are you at on the game? What's your, if you've done it, what's your pure power rating?
I haven't made an adjustment to what I did before the bowl season, but I will say this. It's one of the things where
what did you have before the bowls? I'm intrigued by that. I'm sure you had Clemson ahead of LSU, right? Or
I did. No. I did have Clemson ahead of LSU. That was definitely
there you go.
I mean, for me.
You're making 6, touchdown of adjustment off the semifinals. I mean, Clemson did win. I mean, I get it that I thought Ohio State probably should have won the game, and Ohio State certainly looked like the superior team in the first 20, 25 minutes. Clearly a superior team, and Ohio State certainly, I mean, just 1 or 2 plays goes their way instead of against them. They win the game, but I mean, even then, you downgrade Clemson a point. I mean, I'm being very negative on Clemson, I think. And you're right. In the last half of that game, they look like the superior team. I know they still got a couple calls go their way, but in the second half, I thought Clemson was a better team.
They were. I mean, the thing of it is, I mean, Ohio State should have been up 28-0 at halftime.
Yeah.
Or maybe 28-7, something like that. They killed themselves, not by, converting in the red zone. I mean, that was a huge problem for them. And, everything changed, too, when Shaun Wade went out, because then all of a sudden Clemson started moving the football. So that's the sad part is, Ohio State played without that guy for a couple of games in the regular season, and he goes out and everything still goes to shit with all the talent on that team, all the talent in the secondary. They didn't adjust particularly well to that. And, we'll see if Shaun Wade goes to the NFL, what that means for Ohio State next year. But I had Clemson maybe -3, -3.5 or so. Now, of course, when you consider the game being in New Orleans, I would give LSU, a couple of points, much like you did. So maybe my line coming into the bowl season, Clemson -1, -1.5 in this game. This is a huge adjustment. It really, truly is.
Especially, and we're not talking about after 2 games. We're talking about after 14 games. I mean, if you're making 3, 4, 5, 6 point adjustments at this late in the season, I mean, unless there's a fundamental change like quarterback and whatnot, I mean, I don't get it. I'm built not to make those adjustments this late in the season.
And also, too, I mean, for LSU, is Georgia's offense really any good? I mean, Oklahoma's offense is very good from a yard.
Yeah, but the Big 12 showed the Big 12
right.
sucks, man. Outside of Texas, I mean, that was about as bad as a bowl season. I mean, Georgia beat Baylor with the JV team. Notre Dame embarrassed Iowa State. I mean, that wasn't even a game. So I thought, even though I had Kansas State against Navy, I thought Navy dominated Kansas State anywhere but the scoreboard. So the Big 12 just stinks. So to me, kudos to LSU. I'll give them credit. I mean, they blew the doors off Oklahoma, but guess what? So did like 3 other teams did against Big 12 teams so far the bowl season.
Well, I was skeptical of Georgia all year long because of their offense. Alabama moved it on LSU. Florida moved it on LSU. Why can't Clemson move it on LSU? I think LSU's going to get their yardage, but there's a reason that this total is up in the 70 range. So I think Clemson could score with LSU if they want to. Maybe not as explosive necessarily with some of the big downfield vertical throws, but I think Clemson's going to score plenty of points here in this game too. So this should be a fun one. Obviously, I won't be as invested as a fan as I would have been otherwise, but maybe gives me a little bit more of an objective view at this handicap, and especially when it comes to the prop market, which will be very interesting because you've got a total of 70, and people love playing player prop overs. So
Yeah,
that'll be a very fun discussion for us next week.
certainly will. And I forgot to mention my condolences. I know it's 5-6 days after the fact, but how long did it take to get over that one?
It was tough. I mean, it's especially tough because, I went into the game with no expectations, like I talked about last week. I was hoping to see a good game. Obviously, I was hoping Ohio State would come out on top, but I knew that they were playing the best team that they'd seen all year. But then as the game flow starts going and they leave 12 points on the field in the first half, I knew exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So that makes it even harder, and then the ridiculous overturn on the fumble call. I mean, that was terrible. I don't know if Ohio State wins the game, but another game-changing play there. The manner in which they lost made it a hell of a lot more difficult. I will say that.
Fair enough. But you're not like these other Buckeye fans that blamed it entirely on the officials.
No, put it in the.
It's funny, Buckeye fans.
I had to stop myself because I was going to say some words I don't usually say on this show, but put it in the damn end zone when you get inside the 10-yard line.
J.K. Dobbins dropped one, and the other one was more of a bad pass on Fields' part. But those are 2 touchdowns right there. And they should have had this one screen pass at Dobbins, bro. I mean, he walks into the end zone on that one. That was tough. And Buckeye fans have short-term memories, but didn't they win a national championship off a questionable call? I mean, it goes both ways, people.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. It's fine. But and the thing of it too is, I mean, the play calling inside the 10 was terrible. I mean, it was so bad. Now they've got to rebuild the secondary. They lost, Yursich and Halfley now.
Yeah.
They'll still hire somebody great. I think they already elevated somebody they really like within the program to quarterbacks coach. But I mean, hey, you get that close. I mean, those are opportunities you have to take advantage of, because if we know anything about the college football playoff, there's literally no margin for error. You lose one game and you hope for the best. You lose 2 games and you're not getting there. So when you get that close, you better take advantage of that opportunity. And Ohio State didn't. And if Justin Fields checks down to J.K. Dobbins, gets another 7 or 8 yards, and they get more cracks at the end zone, does it go differently on that last series? It very well could have. So, well, whatever. I guess it's Clemson and LSU now, and that's what we worry about there for the national championship. All right, we move over to the NFL side of things here for the wild card weekend. We start in the AFC, game 141, 142, Buffalo and Houston. Texans 2.5 at home here, so Buffalo, very strong teaser candidate, although this total's gone up from 41.5 to 44 now.
I'm more on the under. But I agree Buffalo's a strong teaser play here, just because I think that'd be low variance, you would think, in the game. Man, if you'd have told me, though, prior to last week and whatnot, I mean, I would have said at least these 2 teams are even as far as on the field. If not, I probably would have had pure power rating Houston a little bit better. Statistically speaking, Buffalo's been the superior team down the stretch because, I mean, the Texans were outgained on the season and outscored by a combined 7 points. So that's not good. But obviously losing by 21 in the finale didn't help there. I went under. I mean, that's been the way to go in the Buffalo games. I got to certainly respect the market here. But, under's been more profitable than not in Houston down the stretch. And then certainly 12-4 of the under in Buffalo games. Watt's back for Houston. I'm not sure he moves the needle that much. Houston played the tougher schedule. I'll have to look, but there's a very, very strong system in the wild card round where if you played the tougher schedule by some margin, I mean, we're talking 65+% against the spread if you're just blindly playing on the teams that play the tougher schedule. So to me, lean Houston, like the under a little bit more, but nothing like, big bets for me.
Well, and this is a tricky handicap here. I mean, I initially liked the Bills plus 2.5. Obviously, I like them more as a teaser candidate, like I mentioned already, because I sort of looked at this from a defensive standpoint for Houston, and the things that Buffalo does well on offense are the things that Houston doesn't do well on defense. They don't limit yards after the catch. We know Josh Allen's not going to beat anybody downfield, but the Texans don't do particularly well tackling in the open field, limiting some of those big gains with yards after the catch. And, Buffalo can run the football a little bit. Devin Singletary was much better than Frank Gore. Texans run defense not particularly strong. and they don't pressure the quarterback. So Josh Allen, in his first career playoff start, should have some time to go through his progressions and all that. Yes, J.J. Watt is back, so maybe that kind of changes the Houston dynamic a little bit. Then the more you think about it, the markets have hated Buffalo most of the year. The public has been okay with Buffalo. A lot of sharp money has faded Buffalo because they've played nobody throughout the course of the season. They played a very weak schedule, one of the weakest in the NFL. New England, they played twice, obviously. But other than that, they weren't really tested a whole lot by very good offenses or particularly good defenses. The question is, how good is Houston? Because their offense is much different without Will Fuller. If he plays, that's a huge feather in their cap. And the defense is bad. They give up the most yards per play in the NFL. So I think this one's a tricky handicap. I really do.
I think you touched on. I mean, the wise guys, that, worship at the altar of YPP are going to see, how bad statistically Houston's been. I mean, with Will Fuller banged up on the offense side of the ball. I get it. It's just, to me, doesn't the game seem more important to Houston? I mean, they lose at home here. It's another playoff failure for them, where Buffalo, obviously they want to win, and Sean McDermott's a really good coach, but I get more happy to be there type of feelings for Buffalo, where Houston, the entire offseason narrative changes on a win or a loss here. But we'll see. Again, not high value picks for me. I certainly understand the teaser action on Buffalo.
Yeah, I think Buffalo and then New Orleans, which we'll talk about here in a minute. That's your quintessential teaser. They're going through 3 and 7. It makes a lot of sense to get both of those. McDermott and O'Brien's an interesting thing too, because nobody really thinks highly of Bill O'Brien. A lot of people just don't like the play calling, don't like the sequencing. He runs a lot on first down. He puts Deshaun Watson into a lot of 3rd and long situations, and Watson bails him out a lot, but Watson also gets hit a lot because of it. So I think this may be a live betting type of game to sort of see how everything kind of sets up a little bit. Maybe take that teaser position pregame, but maybe some live opportunities in that one down in the Lone Star State. How about the other AFC playoff game? 143-144, Tennessee and New England. New England back up to 5, just about market wide after hitting 4.5 early in the week. Total of 44 for this one.
Yeah, if it's truly the end of New England's dynasty, this is the game that's going to say it for me. Because, when you're looking at, historically speaking, the spot cries for New England. We'll start with the system. Teams that just usually, coming off a loss as a double-digit favorite, a straight-up loss. Last 30 years in the NFL, they're 57% against the spread. So overreaction to a team losing outright as a double-digit favorite makes sense. And then you look at the Patriots, since their first Super Bowl win. So technically, when you win the Super Bowl, the next season, you're going to be paying a premium why you're the defending champ. So since that first Super Bowl winning season, the Patriots off a loss, 66% against the spread. The Patriots off a home loss, same time period, back to 2002, 75% against the spread. Patriots with revenge. Last time they played the Titans, they lost 65% against the spread. If they don't perform well here in this spot, then it is indeed over for the Patriots, and I'm not willing to make that case yet.
This is one where I think it's really challenging because you've got a New England team that, look, we know this offense is not very good. It just isn't. Without Rob Gronkowski to stretch the field, open up a lot of things for Tom Brady, they've struggled. And as I mentioned on Tuesday's segment with Brian Blessing, from an adjusted yards per pass attempt standpoint, this is the worst year for Brady since Gronk missed half the season with a torn ACL. So it hurts them. It really, truly hurts them. But what do we know about Bill Belichick? He takes your best weapon away. If he thinks that that's Derrick Henry, he's very lucky because Stephon Gilmore gets to go up against A.J. Brown. You don't have to help Gilmore. You can leave him on an island, and he's perfectly fine. So you wonder about Tennessee's effectiveness offensively, and New England, if they don't get a turnover, they can't score. Unless it's some sort of trick play or something weird, they can't score. This has to be an underplay, right?
Yeah, I can see that, certainly. And that's the thing where, the market's never figured out in New England what they do. If you had to ask one team this weekend, are they going to score a special teams touchdown? They're going to score a trick play. Who would you say out of the 8 teams?
New England.
And they just do stuff. Can't figure it out. When you're 60% against the spread, for about 2 decades. I mean, you're doing something that the market just doesn't grasp. Because I mean, I get it. This year, statistically speaking, offense and Brady is about as bad as they've been in this run. But I mean, they've never been that strong statistically. I mean, they've never been at least strong that would say that this is clearly the best dynasty we've seen in the history of the NFL. Yeah, I think certainly I expect Belichick to get after Henry. I mean, that's the weapon you take away, and so be it. If Ryan Tannehill goes into New England in the playoffs on a Saturday night up there, and if he's the guy that beats you, then so be it. I'm not willing to put my faith that I know he's had a really good season so far in the last 10 games, but I'm not willing to put my faith in Tannehill, a quarterback, to get the job done.
Well, and then, something else that's kind of interesting here, and I will say this, I am going nowhere near this side. I love the under 44. I actually played at 43.5. I'm surprised it's gone up a little bit, to be totally honest with you. But James White, I mean, this dude's going to have like 85 catches for like 400 receiving yards in this game, isn't he? I mean, he has.
You never know what Belichick's going to do. That's what makes it tough.
I mean, it's Edelman or White, right? I mean, they don't have anything else. So
they don't, but I mean, in past years, we've seen guys like a Chris Hogan come out of nowhere. I mean, in their earlier run, I mean, you had guys like David Givens and whatnot. I mean,
there's a name.
Come out of the woodwork.
There's a name. I like that one.
Jonas Gray runs for 240 yards or whatever. 1 week he's off the team, the next week.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a good point. But like I said, I mean, it's the under for me. I don't think I really like a side here in that one between Tennessee and New England. We transition over to Sunday, and the Saints out for revenge for the Minneapolis Miracle in game 145-146. Saints favored by 8, pretty much market wide out there. Total up on this game as well, from 47 to as high as 50. Do the Saints get revenge, and do they cover the number in the process?
Yeah, I'd prefer New Orleans in a teaser, and whether it's Buffalo or the game we're going to get to next, I mean, if you're not playing New Orleans on a teaser, I know it sounds square, but I mean, sometimes don't overthink this stuff. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's not necessarily square when you're playing advantage teasers through key numbers at 3 and 7. Long term, you do show a profit, although I expect the books to. If I'm running a book, maybe I shade it a little bit more here, because I'm sure there's going to be some massive teaser exposure on the Saints in this game. I mean, I'll say this from a headline perspective. I think New Orleans is one of the best teams we've ever seen in the wild card. I mean, 13-3 usually is good enough to get a bye. They're plus 117 points on the season. And really, since week 3, I get they lost to the 49ers at home, but I mean, that was whoever had the ball last type of game who was going to win. But I can make a case. It's, the Saints are maybe the 3rd best team in the NFL. I mean, they're the best team in the NFC, and maybe from a pure power ratings aspect, and only behind in the NFL, the Ravens and maybe the Chiefs. So, I mean, I haven't liked what I've seen from Minnesota. I thought that Monday Night Football loss was stunningly horrific. I mean, they lost by 13 and probably could have lost the game by 30 if you looked at the box score. Saints were much better at home. No surprise there. If you're looking at yards per game, about 120 yards per game better differential at home than they were on the road. Yeah, I would lean New Orleans even on the side, even though it's a big number. But certainly, if you're not playing New Orleans in a teaser, I don't know what you're doing this week.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's New Orleans and Buffalo just because I don't necessarily love the other game there in the NFC from a teaser standpoint. But, yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you that the Saints -2 is I don't want to call it a no-brainer because we don't want to undersell anything here. But, man, it looks good. It looks very hard for them to lose this game at home. Now, on the flip side, to play devil's advocate a little bit, Minnesota throughout the course of the season, Dalvin Cook's been kind of banged up. He's actually missed a couple of games. Adam Thielen only played 10 games, only had 30 catches. Fortunately, Kyle Rudolph kind of refound himself a little bit. Stephon Diggs was hurt in and out throughout the season, wound up playing 15 games, but he still had a lot of his issues. Then there's Kirk Cousins. And I think Kirk Cousins is the sole reason why this line is 8, why this line is so far above a touchdown, because people don't trust the guy. They don't believe in the guy in these games against really good teams. And maybe he hasn't given anybody a reason to believe in him in these types of spotlight matchups. But if you look at these two teams and their statistical profiles, I think 7 is fair. I think 8
Yeah.
is largely narrative driven. So if I had to play it straight, it would be Minnesota. But like we've already talked about, I think teasing the Saints down just makes too much sense.
Yeah, and I think you made a great point. I mean, if you'd asked me at any point during the season, I mean, what's the line on this game? Or at least, well, let's just say anytime for the most part in December, Saints are about 3 points better. You factor in home field, 6. I get the Saints have a really good home field. So maybe it's 7 if you're overly down. 8, certainly, you're paying a premium if you want to back the Saints, just when it comes to ATS at 8. I think in past years, if it was 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't be laying 8 in this one. I mean, it'd be 7 at most, probably maybe even 6.5 on the Saints if this was the NFL market 15 years ago.
Yeah, I wonder about that. If there's any, I don't want to say there's social media influence in the market, but I mean, look, there is that very strong narrative against Cousins, and maybe it's more performance-based than anything else because he has been bad in games like this. I mean, there's no denying that. So I think that really does factor in to where this line is a little bit. I want to circle back to something you said really quickly. New Orleans is the number 1 team in the NFC for you. They're higher than San Francisco.
Yeah, and I get you're going to say, didn't the 49ers just go in and beat the Saints a few weeks ago? And wasn't that why New Orleans too? Yeah, I still got the Saints better. I don't like the trend line of the 49ers defense. I mean, you look at their first 7-8 games, they were the best defense, statistically speaking, yards per game, points per game in the NFL, even better than New England because New England started their drop a little bit before then. I mean, you look at their last 8-9 games of the season, I mean, from a points per game perspective, I mean, San Francisco's not even top 20 defensively. I mean, 24, 25 in the league. So I don't like the trend line there. And, Jimmy G who would you rather have in a playoff game with everything on the line, Drew Brees or Jimmy G? Give me Drew Brees.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the biggest winner in Week 17 was San Francisco to get that bye. I mean,
no question.
They needed it so bad. And they almost gave it away, of course, as we all know with how that game finished up against Seattle. But, I mean, their bye was in Week 4. I mean, they needed it bad. And maybe it's what propels them to win the NFC, but also, like you said, there are some big concerns about that offense. And, 1 week off may not be a cure-all for that defense, especially depending on, who they wind up playing in next week's game. And Seattle and Philadelphia here. Game 147, 148. Seattle anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 market wide. The 2.5's at Bovada and MyBookie, which obviously suggests to you that the public side in this game is very much Seattle. Rest of the market mostly 1.5 here. Total down from 46 to 45.5. Once again, pretty much market wide. What does Brad Powers think about the last game here of the wild card weekend?
Yeah, I'm on Philadelphia. Looking at it here, I mean, I really don't trust either team. Although you gotta give Philadelphia credit. I mean, they just played 4 must-win games and got them all, despite the fact they've been depleted. And I get it, they got even more injury concerns this week. But they had those injury concerns last week in the fourth quarter against the Giants. Is tied up. What do they do? I mean, they man up like they've done the last 3 years now and outscored the Giants 17-0. I think Seattle's one of the most overrated teams in the NFL. I mean, here's a team that's only +7 cumulative points on the season, outgained on the season. Philadelphia, meanwhile, is +31 points, +28 yards per game. So just, high-level statistics, points and yards. Philadelphia's a superior team, and yet they're catching 1.5 at home. I did Philly with the teaser, and hear me out. Only 2 of Seattle's wins this year came by more than 7 points. I know you're going to say, wasn't one of those in Philadelphia? Seattle won by 8. When you look at that game, I mean, Seattle to win by 8 were +3 in turnovers. And to me, turnovers is the most important stat in all of football. And you're +3, you probably should win by more than 8. I mean, statistically speaking, Philly had a big first down edge in that one. Seattle's off that 60-minute war, a game that basically came down to the final play of the game. Play for play, minute for minute on a Sunday night game against the 49ers, and now they're across the country here. I lean Philadelphia, and I did play Philly in a teaser.
Yeah, I like Philadelphia here, too. I agree with the teaser angle. Did you pair that with the Saints then, I assume?
I did. I'm going to play 2 teasers, Saints with Bills, Saints with Eagles, although I prefer the Eagles just a little bit more. I think most would prefer the Bills.
Yeah, I think this is one, too, where, I mean, you definitely want to sprinkle the money line here if you're going to take Philadelphia. Maybe just outright take the money line as opposed to the 1.5 or 2.5. I do think that, this should be a relatively close game, but, man, Doug Peterson, I mean, this team, all the skill position injuries that they've had all year long, where is this team in third down conversion rate? Well, they're fourth. Where is this team in red zone touchdown percentage? They're third. And they've had dudes going out left and right, guys on the offensive line, skill position guys. Like I mentioned on Tuesday, if you're tailgating for this game, you may have scouts watching how you catch the football because you could wind up lining up for the Eagles in this game. And yet they're top 5 in third down conversion rate and red zone touchdown percentage. That's about scheming. That's about play design. That's about finding ways to get dudes open and Wentz getting them the football. And that's with all those injuries. Philadelphia, the coaching job that Doug Peterson has done this year is not getting nearly enough run because everyone's busy talking shit about the NFC East and how bad it is and this and that. You know what? If you told me about this injury list before the season, I would have expected Philadelphia to go, 6-10? And
Pretty
here they
much
are winning the division. It's got to be Philadelphia here. It just has to be.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a change the narrative type of game for Carson Wentz to get a playoff win here. I mean, because obviously, and it's kind of hangover. I said the fact that Foles won that Super Bowl, and he didn't, even though, prior to getting hurt, he was the guy that, was arguably the MVP of the league. So, I mean, if he can just get one playoff win, I mean, at least in that city, you got to say, hey, we got our quarterback of the future. I think there's still some skepticism out there. I'm not sure why. I think this season certainly proved it with so many guys at the skill position out from him, the fact that he still can perform at a high level. But if he can just get this win here in the playoffs, his first playoff game here, because he's missed the last couple of years, I think it'd be big for Wentz.
Brad Powers, professional handicapper over at BradPowersSports.com. What's the story over there right now, man?
Yeah, the story, like always, is just, I know we're wrapping up on the football season, only a few bowl games left, and we covered them, and, just the NFL playoffs. But I'll run a special. Right now, you'll see a price for the rest of this season for $49 at BradPowersSports.com. If you click on the Powers Picks newsletter, $49 for the rest of this season. I'll throw in next season, 2020, for free, $49. And make sure you go to Brad Power Sports and sign up for the rest of this season. And I'll make sure I notate your account and make sure you're signed up for 2020. $49 for that newsletter, 56% against the spread for 5 years now running, or plus like 100 games. We're talking a sample size of about 800 plus games. 56%, not too bad. Powers Picks newsletter, $49 this year, next year.
Yeah, and I can tell you that's the best value in the business here. And you can download past editions of that newsletter and see what you get for your money. And I mean, I know you talk about this all the time, pulling all-nighters, working on the newsletter, putting a pick on every game in there. So, I mean, absolutely phenomenal piece of very valuable information for you out there for football handicapping for next season. So something you definitely want to look to take advantage of here. Again, that's Brad Powers over at BradPowersSports.com, at Brad Powers and the number 7 on Twitter. Brad, thank you so much for your time, man. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right. It sounds good, my friend. Take care.